was spring 2009 and I was 23 years old, living in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. During the day, my life was fairly normal. I was working 9 to 5 in criminal justice policy research at Harvard Kennedy School. But at least once a week in the evenings, I would take the bus for an hour into the inner city of Boston to volunteer as a teacher for teenage boys in prison. The students in my prison class helped me see the world in a new light. I learned that even in a major American city like Boston, some young people don't have access to internet. Most had never ventured further than the street on which they lived. Many didn't have bank accounts, and few could name a single positive role model who truly cared about them. But the biggest lesson that I learned from my students is that when young people end up in prison, it's a waste of potential and a net loss to society. Take my entrepreneurship student Ryan, for example. Ryan was around 18 years old, and what made him light up was talking about the latest in mobile phone technology. Now, information is hard to access while you're in prison, and so these kids are always finding creative ways of figuring out what's going on the outside. While some young people were smuggling in the latest in what their friends were up to, Ryan was getting the news on Nokia's last upgrade. And so when the time came for Ryan to be released from prison, and he was getting help finding a job, it seemed fairly obvious that he should be placed in a mobile phone store, or that he should go back to school and study IT or telecoms. But instead, he was placed in an entry-level position at a fast food chain. There are some people that would argue, given Ryan's criminal record, that he's lucky to even have a job, and he should take whatever he's given. And I understand that. But I believe that when you know a young person is inspired, it's important for us to help that young person achieve their goals, even if it's a small step along the way. And besides, it's easy to see that if Ryan were working in a job that he loved, that the chances of him staying out of trouble would be much higher. And then there was Jake. Jake was about 16 years old, and he had this brilliant smile that could warm up any room. He was also one of the most dangerous, serious, and prolific young gang members in Boston. Jake attended my entrepreneurship class as and when he felt like it, which was about half the time. And when he did come to class, he was a disruptive student. You could see, though, that underneath this tough exterior was a young man with very low self-esteem. Jake did attend our final entrepreneurship class, which was on sales and marketing, and we asked each of the students to prepare a 1-minute sales pitch as part of a competition. Jake won this competition by far. He knew it, and his peers knew it. And at that moment, something clicked for Jake, such that when we taught the next round of entrepreneurship classes, not only did Jake attend, but he went from being a disruptive student to the teacher's pet. Now that is the power of Jake finding out that something that he enjoyed doing, selling, was also something that he was good at, and that had value. Not surprisingly, not all of my students were interested in sales or in mobile phone technology in this prison class. For many of these teenage boys, money was a big attraction. One class, one of the students, Jaden, said, "To be honest, I'm making a lot more money selling drugs than I would in a 9-to-5 job, so why should I even bother?" There were nods of agreement around the room. "Okay," my co-teacher and I said, "how much money do you handle in 1 year selling drugs?" $100,000, he said. "And how much of that is yours to keep?" $50,000, he bragged. My co-teacher and I knew that this was highly unlikely, but we went along with it anyways. "So how many hours a week do you work?" we asked. "I'm on call 24 hours a day," he said, 7 days a week. "Vacation?" "Not really." And then we did the math. $50,000 divided by 365 days, divided by 24 hours a day, works out to $5.70 an hour. And back then, minimum wage was $8 an hour. At that point, my co-teacher chimed in. "My first job out of university," she said, "was in finance, and I made $100,000 plus bonus and holidays." You should have seen Jaden perk up at that. Without skipping a beat, he asked, "So what do I need to do to get into university?" Higher education was a concept that Jaden had never even considered, because the idea that you could make good money legitimately with a university degree just wasn't on his radar. In the communities where many of these young people have grown up, they tend to see people that are struggling to make ends meet while working in minimum wage, entry-level jobs. They see people who are selling drugs or engaged in other illicit activity for economic reasons. They see people that are claiming long-term unemployment benefits. And they see people coming in and out of prison. And they assume that that's what life holds for them too, and that their personal dreams and ambitions are irrelevant because they have no place in a community like that. Through teaching these young people in prison, I came to the conclusion that every one of them has a passion, whether it's hidden or blatantly obvious, a tiny spark or a burning flame for which I believe they'd be willing to do whatever it takes to pursue. That means seeking out mental health treatment, going through drugs and alcohol recovery, getting a job, going back to school, learning how to read, changing their friends, and refraining from crime. Every person has a spark inside of them. It's just that in the case of young people in prison, because of their backgrounds or the lack of support they receive, they tend to feel so limited in what they feel that they're entitled to do, that sometimes they don't even try. And that is tragic. Having this epiphany was one thing, but how do you actually go about empowering a young person in the criminal justice system to recognize and realize their potential? My head was swimming with ideas, and I decided to start off by matching up young people in prison with caring adult role models who share their interests. I selected one young person in prison for the pilot and matched him up with a young woman from Harvard Kennedy School. They met a few times while he was in prison, got along well, and continued to meet up after he'd been released. They even toured around MIT's Media Center, the first time this young person had been there, despite having an interest in science and having grown up in Boston. And he loved it. In fact, he made such an impression on the Media Center tour guide that she later sent me an email saying, maybe he'll come here one day. But shortly thereafter, I got an email. The program was being shut down due to bureaucratic red tape, and the mentoring had to stop immediately. There was nothing I could do about it. And this was incredibly painful on several levels. It was immensely frustrating and disappointing to know that all the hard work I put into developing this program was going down the drain. But more significantly, it was a sudden end to a very positive relationship that we built with our first mentee. I tried to explain to him what had happened, but I know that wasn't good enough. At the end of the day, I let him down, and we had deserted him. And what was I supposed to tell all of the other young people who had signed up for a mentor as part of this program? As it turns out, I wasn't able to reach them, and the impact of that still haunts me because I know that I had contributed to the feeling that many of these young people have of trusting in an adult to help them, and then deserting them suddenly. But the worst was yet to come. Only 4 months later, just after I'd moved to the UK to start my master's degree in criminology, I got an email about our first mentee, this 18-year-old boy who enjoyed science, who was really getting his life back on track. And the email informed me that he had been murdered. He had been shot while he was out with a friend. They'd both been armed with guns, and they'd been attempting to rob somebody. It was all over the news. And I couldn't help but think, what if? What if we'd been able to continue working with him? Maybe this wouldn't have happened. Maybe he would still be alive. Maybe he'd be studying science in school. Our mentee's death pushed me with a renewed urgency to pick up where I'd left off, now in the UK. I was determined to put into practice the ideas that I'd started to have in Boston, but in a more coordinated manner to avoid future bureaucratic surprises. I decided to start working on a business plan. Less exciting times followed this revelation. Many evenings spent working on my laptop, researching best practices in criminal justice rehabilitation, writing budgets and marketing plans, having endless conversations with criminal justice practitioners, young people and adults who've been to prison, business advisors. And what came out of all of this work was the design for a life coaching program, a method of engaging young people in the criminal justice system in a conversation around their values, passions, and ambitions to motivate them to want to live a better life, one that had meaning and purpose for them. And we called this program Spark Inside. In spring 2011, I entered the business plan for Spark Inside in a social enterprise competition for £5,000 at the University of Cambridge. I made a promise to myself that if I won the competition, I would move to London and start the organization full-time. You can guess what happened next. In January 2012, I secured a 2-year visa to work in the UK, and I moved to London knowing just a handful of people with nowhere to live and only £5,000 in the bank. By March, funding prospects were looking grim, and I'd started applying for a second job, just in case. And then I got a call from a wonderful businessman that I'd met nearly a year prior. "How much money do you still need to launch a venture?" he asked. I told him. "I will fund you," he said. And thanks to this philanthropist's generosity and belief in me, Spark Inside went from being a vision to becoming a reality. 2 years later, I'm delighted that we piloted our life coaching program with 8 teenage boys who were in prison. Our interim evaluation, conducted 6 months after the boys had been released from prison, showed that our reoffending rate was 0%, and that 50% of those boys were engaged in education, employment, and training, with the other half actively looking. We're now poised for growth and expansion. It has not been easy getting to this point. I've had to work a lot of evenings and weekends and give up a major portion of my social life. But I can tell you that it's all been worth it, because knowing that this program could prevent more young people from ending up as statistics has given my life meaning and purpose. It's fueled my spark inside, and it motivates me to go on. I'd like to share with you one final story about one of the young people in my Boston entrepreneurship class who made a deep and lasting impression on me. Lawrence was 16 years old. He attended my entrepreneurship class, but did not actively participate, and I later found out that he could neither read nor write. Lawrence was the only person I've ever met in prison, and by now I've met hundreds of people who truly frightened me. Have you ever met somebody that just looks hollow? When I looked into Lawrence's eyes, all I could see was the shell of a human being. It seemed to me that he was completely unpredictable because he just didn't seem to care anymore what happened to him. On the last day of our 9-week entrepreneurship class, Lawrence called me over and he said, quietly, guiltily, "Baillie, I have to tell you something. I don't actually want to be an entrepreneur." That's fine. I suppose he thought I was going to be disappointed in him, but I was just relieved he was opening up. "So Lawrence," I said, "what is it that you want to do?" And what he said next completely threw me. "What I want to do," said Lawrence, "is work in a daycare center and help children." I still think about his response to this day. While I had thought that Lawrence was hollow and unfeeling, in fact, he was the exact opposite. It's just that this tiny spark of interest within him was buried so deep inside that it had almost been extinguished. But I truly believe that with enough care, attention, and support, we could have ignited that spark, empowered Lawrence to pursue his dream job working in a daycare center, and that he would never have been seen in a prison again. My vision is to enable young people in the criminal justice system who want a way out to know that one exists and to have the tools and support to get there, so that all of the Ryans can fuel their passion for mobile phone technology. The Jakes can work in finance and sales. The Jadens can pursue their career earning money. And the Lawrences can support children in daycare centers. Kids like these shouldn't be hampered because of where they grew up, because society gave up on them, or because we held the bar for their achievements far too low. There's no reason that our young people should end up in prison when they could be contributing positively to society by doing what they love. And there's no reason that any of us should be limited by anything other than our spark inside. And this is what I learned from youth in prison. Thank you.